Before you skip this, understand something. If your life feels heavy, confusing, or stuck, it's not because you're broken. It's because you've been carrying people, habits, and voices that were never meant to come with you. And what I'm about to say may make you uncomfortable, but discomfort is often the sound of truth getting close. Most people wake up every day exhausted, not from work, but from emotional noise. They're drained by conversations they didn't need, opinions they didn't ask for, and relationships they outgrew but never left. And the dangerous part is this: they've accepted that exhaustion as normal. They've convinced themselves that loyalty means self-sacrifice, that being nice means being available, and that silence means weakness. None of that is true. If you stay with me until the end, you'll understand why focusing on yourself isn't selfish, why walking away is sometimes the strongest response, and why the people who resist your growth the most are often the ones closest to you. You'll see how distraction disguises itself as connection, how manipulation hides behind concern, and how your environment quietly shapes your future without asking for permission. This isn't motivation meant to hype you up for a moment. This is a mirror. And what you see in it might explain why your discipline fades, why your confidence wavers, and why your progress feels slower than it should. Once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Stay with this message, because by the time it ends, you won't just feel inspired, you'll feel clear. And clarity changes everything. Let's start with a truth that most people avoid because it shifts responsibility away from bad luck and places it directly where it belongs. Most people don't fail because they lack ability, intelligence, or opportunity. They fail because their attention is constantly being pulled in directions that have nothing to do with who they are trying to become. Failure is rarely dramatic. It doesn't arrive with a loud collapse. It shows up quietly, disguised as distraction, disguised as loyalty, disguised as just one more conversation with people who don't actually move your life forward. Distraction is not always a phone in your hand. Often, it's a person in your head. Someone whose voice you carry even when they're not in the room. Someone whose opinions you rehearse before you make a decision. Someone whose approval you seek without realizing you've given them authority over your direction. And when that happens, your life stops being guided by intention and starts being managed by reaction. Psychologically, this is how momentum dies. The human mind has limited cognitive and emotional bandwidth. Every time you explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, you spend energy that could have been invested in building something meaningful. Every time you absorb someone else's anxiety, bitterness, or insecurity, you weaken your own clarity. You don't notice it at first, because nothing breaks all at once. You just feel tired more often, less decisive, less motivated. That's not laziness. That's cognitive overload caused by the wrong inputs. Here's what most people miss. The brain doesn't distinguish between productive stress and social stress. It processes constant emotional tension the same way it processes danger. So when you surround yourself with people who create drama, doubt, or subtle pressure, your nervous system stays in a low-level survival mode. In that state, creativity drops, discipline weakens, long-term thinking disappears. You're not failing because you're incapable. You're failing because your system is constantly defending itself. And then there's the philosophical side of this, which is even more uncomfortable. When you allow the wrong people consistent access to your life, you're not just being distracted. You're outsourcing your values. You begin adjusting your goals to fit what others are comfortable with. You soften your ambition so it doesn't threaten anyone. You delay your growth so you don't outpace the people around you. That's not kindness. That's self-betrayal. Many people confuse loyalty with obligation. They stay connected to people out of history, not alignment. But history doesn't build futures. Shared values do. Just because someone was there in your past does not mean they deserve a vote in your future. When you don't understand that, distraction becomes emotional blackmail. You feel guilty for choosing yourself. You feel selfish for prioritizing focus. And slowly, your life becomes a negotiation instead of a mission. What's dangerous about distraction is that it feels harmless. It feels social. It feels normal. Nobody questions why you're always available to listen, explain, or accommodate. But they do question it when you start protecting your time. The moment you become less accessible, people start labeling you as distant, changed, or selfish. That reaction alone tells you everything you need to know. Because people who benefit from your attention will always resist your focus. Think about it this way. Anything that cannot survive without your constant attention is not a relationship. It's a dependency. Healthy connections don't drain you. They don't require you to abandon your goals to maintain peace. They don't punish you for having boundaries. When someone becomes a consistent source of distraction, it's often because your growth disrupts the role you play in their life. And instead of adjusting themselves, they try to keep you where you are. This is where discipline enters the conversation. Not discipline in the sense of grinding harder or pushing longer hours, but discipline over what and who you allow into your mental space. Focus is not something you find, it's something you protect, and protection requires difficult decisions. It requires recognizing that not every conversation deserves a response. Not every opinion deserves consideration. Not every relationship deserves continuation. Once you understand this, your life begins to change in a very quiet but powerful way. You stop reacting to noise. You stop absorbing emotions that don't belong to you. You stop mistaking familiarity for safety, and as the distractions fall away, something interesting happens. Your thinking becomes sharper. Your actions become more deliberate. Your confidence stabilizes, not because you became louder, but because your inner world became less crowded. This is not about cutting people off aggressively or proving a point. It's about alignment. It's about choosing environments that reinforce who you're becoming instead of reminding you who you used to be. It's about realizing that every yes you give to the wrong influence is a no to your own progress. And once you see that clearly, tolerance becomes impossible. So here's the reflection I'll leave you with. If your life feels stuck, don't immediately ask what you're lacking. Ask who or what is consuming your attention without contributing to your growth. Remove the distraction and you don't just regain focus, you reclaim authority over your life. Now let's talk about something that sounds passive on the surface, but is actually one of the most powerful moves a person can make. Silence, distance. The decision not to engage. Most people underestimate it because it doesn't feel like action. There's no dramatic confrontation, no final speech, no emotional release. But psychologically and philosophically, silence and distance are not avoidance. They are boundaries in their most mature form. Human conflict feeds on reaction. When someone disrespects you, manipulates you, or pulls you into emotional chaos, what they are really seeking is engagement. Engagement validates their influence. The moment you argue back, defend yourself, or try to be understood, you've already stepped into their frame. You're now playing a game you didn't design, by rules that don't serve you. Silence, on the other hand, refuses the game entirely. From a psychological standpoint, this is where power shifts. The brain is wired to seek resolution. When you remove your response, you create an unresolved loop for the other person, not for yourself. You regain emotional control by refusing to feed the cycle. That's why silence is so uncomfortable for people who thrive on drama or dominance. They can't manipulate what they can't reach. They can't control what no longer reacts. Distance works the same way, but on a deeper level. Distance is not punishment, it's protection. It allows your nervous system to reset. When you constantly expose yourself to negativity, your body stays alert, tense, defensive. Distance signals safety. It gives your mind the space it needs to think clearly instead of constantly bracing for the next emotional impact. You don't realize how heavy something is until you put it down. Philosophically, silence and distance reflect self-respect. They say, without explanation, that your peace is not negotiable. And this is important because explaining boundaries often turns into defending them. When you defend, you invite debate. When you invite debate, you imply that your needs require approval. They don't. The most grounded people understand this intuitively. They don't over-communicate their limits. They enforce them through behavior. This is where many people struggle. They believe walking away is weak. They've been taught that strength looks like standing your ground, proving your point, winning the argument. But strength isn't about winning exchanges. It's about choosing where your energy goes. True strength is restraint. It's knowing you could engage, but deciding not to because nothing valuable comes from it. Silence is especially powerful because it forces clarity. When you stop explaining yourself, people are left with your actions, and actions are harder to distort. If someone truly respects you, they will adjust. If they don't, they will reveal themselves through their reaction. Either way, you gain information without losing your composure. There's also a deeper emotional maturity at work here. Silence requires security. Insecurity needs to be seen, heard, validated. Security knows who it is without an audience. When you are secure, you don't need the last word. You don't need agreement. You don't need closure from people who never offered honesty in the first place. You move on, not because you're cold, but because you're clear. Distance often brings guilt, especially for people who are empathetic or conscientious. You worry about being misunderstood. You worry about hurting others. But here's the truth most people avoid. You are not responsible for managing the emotional reactions of people who disrespect your boundaries. Compassion does not mean self-sacrifice. Caring does not mean enduring harm. Distance can be the most compassionate option when closeness only produces conflict. What happens when you embrace silence and distance consistently is subtle but profound. Your emotional reactions slow down. You stop feeling pulled into unnecessary tension. You begin to trust yourself more because you're no longer constantly second-guessing your responses. Over time, this builds a quiet confidence. Not the kind that needs to announce itself, but the kind that doesn't need permission to exist. And here's the part that changes everything. When you stop reacting, you stop being predictable. People who relied on your emotional responses lose leverage. They may escalate, criticize, or provoke. That's not strength on their part, that's desperation. And if you remain consistent, the dynamic collapses on its own. No argument required. This approach also changes how you see conflict entirely. You begin to ask a different question. Not how do I respond, but is this worth responding to at all?